So today we are learning more about factoring. This is something that you're going to have to do in all of your future math classes at the high school. So it's really important that we know how to do this well. We are also going to be doing most of this without a calculator. If you are on your homework and you're dealing with some bigger numbers and you need that to help you, okay, that is okay. But I want you to try to do as much as you can without your calculator, okay? So there are three main rules to factoring. I like to break them down into these three steps, and to help me remember what to do, I always say the rules of factoring are just like the rules of dating. So if you find somebody you think you like them, you want to find out what you guys have in common, right? Okay, and then after you find something you have in common, maybe you see if there's something special about them. Yeah, what makes them special? What makes them a unique person? Why do you want to spend time with them? And then after that, you just got to guess and you got to check it out. Right, ladies? Feeling generous? So give them a try. Guess and check. Okay, so in terms of math, let's go back and talk about what this is going to look like. So when we say what they have in common, what we're talking about is the GCF, or the greatest common factor. You probably have been taking out GCFs that are numbers, but the GCF includes numbers and variables. So write this down with me, please. Okay, the GCF is going to include numbers and variables. Now, there are some special patterns, okay, that we're going to talk about today, and the two main ones we're going to talk about are the difference of two squares, and then we're also going to talk about something called a perfect square trinomial. Do either of those sound familiar? The difference of two squares? Okay, so the difference of two squares is something that you may have seen before. Maybe you haven't talked about the perfect square trinomial, but I think this one is actually pretty simple because you are going to be able to find it with guess and check. When you guess and check, you are using FOIL. Okay, essentially what you are doing is you are unfoiling, okay, your polynomial. So when you are factoring a trinomial, do you guys know what a trinomial is? It has three terms. So you multiply to get the last number. You multiply to get the last number. And you add or subtract to get the middle number. Sometimes you subtract because sometimes you have a negative. Now, you can always check with FOIL, so you should know before you turn a test in whether you got a problem right or not, because it should FOIL back to your original problem, okay? All right, so we're going to factor each expression. So we're going to start by taking out the GCF. So we're going to do it step by step, okay? So for the first one, you have 6 and 15. Let's just talk about the numbers. In terms of numbers, what can you take out? You can say it out loud. You guys can all tell me. 3, okay? Now, with the variables, do we know how to do that part? Yes, the x is what's going to come out with it, okay? So when you take this out, you are going to put the rest inside parentheses. This GCF stays in front of the parentheses. Okay, so the GCF stays in front of your parentheses. Okay, this is not a trinomial. Do you guys know what this is? A binomial. Yep, 2 terms. Good. Okay, so 6 divided by 3 is 2. X squared divided by x is x. Negative 15 divided by 3 is negative 5. X divided by x is going to cancel. Okay, so this is like undoing the distributive property. and you could check using distribution. 3x times 2x is 6x squared. 3x times negative 5 is negative 15x. That is going to be your final answer. Okay, so if you have a binomial, check for that GCF. Okay, now when you have a trinomial, you should still check for your GCF, okay, to see if there's something that goes into all of them. If a number only goes into 2 of them, it is not a greatest common factor. It has to go into all 3. So if it doesn't, then what we're going to do is we're going to set up the 2 parentheses for FOIL. Okay, now the first 2 numbers have to multiply to x squared. So to multiply to x squared, you just do x times x. Okay, and then I'm going to show you a strategy called the T-chart. So this one is this one's kind of simpler for you to do in your head, but some of them we're going to have to make these charts so we can see what our options are. So if it has to multiply to 16, okay, we're going to write down all the factors. So 1 times 16, 2 times 8, 4 and 4. I always go in order, that way I know I found them all, like when they start repeating themselves. And then you also want to pay attention to that last number, because the sign of that number is going to tell you about what signs you have in your parentheses. Okay, so how do you know they're both negative? Okay, so if the product is positive, okay, let's not talk about this one, but in general, if the last number is positive, what do you know about the signs here? They have to be the same. Okay, so he was saying, oh, because this is positive and this is negative, that tells me both of these have to be negative, right? Yep, great. All right, and then the other case you're going to see is if the product is negative, and what does that mean about the signs? They're different or opposite, either one. Okay, so they're either the same sign or they are opposite signs. So you're going to be thinking about that every single time you are setting these up, okay? Now with ones where it's just x squared, you can just see what 2 of them add to 10. So what 2 are going to add to 10? 8 and 2. And then you can check with FOIL. When you check with FOIL, because of the way that we set this up, I always do the inside and I do the outside. And if they match, then you know that you factored it correctly. So your final answer is x minus 2 times x minus 8. And the order that you put them in doesn't matter. So if you did x minus 8 times x minus 2, that's the same thing. Is this what you guys remember from Algebra 1? Okay, so looks like half of you are yes and half of you are no. Okay, so for C, again, we're going to make sure that there's nothing that can be taken out of all of them. If there's not, then we're going to set up our 2 parentheses. Okay, understand that you are just checking this with FOIL to make sure that this is the trinomial. Like x times x is x squared. These 2 are going to add to negative 10. Negative 2 times negative 8 is positive 16. So here, I want the first 2 to multiply to 2x squared. Well, that's great because 2 is a prime number. What's the only way to get 2? 2. Yeah. 2x and x. Okay, now this is a negative 12. So if you have a negative, you know the signs are opposite. You don't necessarily know that this is a plus and this is a minus, but we're going to be guessing and checking. So I usually just put them in and then I adjust them as I need to. Okay, so if you have a negative 12, let's talk about what our options are. These 2 spaces have to be filled in with 2 numbers that multiply to 12. So it's 1 and 12 or 2 and, yep, 3 and 4. And then I don't want you guys to tell me yet, so I want you guys to do some plugging in. Okay, so we're going to pick any 2 numbers from here. We're going to keep in mind that we want them to add up to 5. If you are not sure, you can literally just plug in any of them and you can check it. So let's say I'm thinking it's 2 and 6. Okay, if I plug in 6 and 2, okay, and I try this out, here I have 6 times x, here I have 2 times negative 2, that adds to 2. Is that what I want? Nope. Okay, so that's not going to work, so I'm just going to try something else then. So I'm going to start over. I'm going to start with the 2x and the x. Okay, yeah, we can try the 3 and 4. Okay, and then do you guys have any idea on what signs you want to try?
3 is the negative, 4 is the positive.
All right, let's check. Okay, so if we do negative 3 times x, we get negative 3. 2 times 4 is 8. So when you add them together, you get, yay. So once you can see that those are matching, as long as you used your rules, okay, then you should be good. I always do this check in my head. The 2x times x is 2x squared. The negative 3 times 4 is negative 12. And then I like to write those out, okay? You don't have to write out the middle, but like I said, for some of you, that's going to be very helpful. It just depends on what your factoring experience is. All right. For part D, notice this is a binomial as well, not a trinomial. So when you have x squared minus 9, essentially what you have in the middle is a 0. Okay, this is going to be one of your special patterns because x squared and 9 are both perfect squares. We know that because the square root of x squared is what? X. And the square root of 9 is 3. So when you have the difference of two squares, in order to get the middle to be 0, you could do x plus 3 times x minus 3. You have to have opposite signs so that they add up to 0. And then 3 times negative 3 is going to be negative 9. Okay, so we're going to write down this pattern. I'm also going to show you another example on the back. So this is a big one that you're going to have to know. Okay, this is called the difference of two squares. The difference of two squares is always going to have a binomial, and they're always going to be the perfect squares. So something squared here, something squared here. In this case, it was x squared and 3 squared. And then you can you can factor those down into a plus b and a minus b, and then they will FOIL back to a squared minus b squared. Okay, so as you practice that more, you are going to recognize that pattern. All right, and then for part E, there's multiple ways to do this. Okay, what I'm going to teach you how to do is factor out a negative. Okay, when you're factoring and you're looking for the GCF, if it starts with a negative, it is common to factor that out. If you factor out the negative, what happens is all the signs change. Okay, so you'll be left with x squared. Negative x divided by a negative is a positive x. 72 divided by a negative is negative 72. And then that makes this trinomial a little bit easier to factor, and you can keep your negative right on the outside. Okay, so x squared is going to start with x and x. Because this is negative 72, you have one that's plus and one that's minus. And then we're going to do a factor tree, we're going to do a T-chart. You don't have to do a factor tree. Okay, yeah, and so when you're doing like some of the bigger numbers like this, I do find it helpful to go in order. So yep, you 2 and 36, does 3 go in there? 72 hours is 3 days, right?
So 24.
There's another way that you can do it, so I'm going to show you some equivalent answers, okay? And then 4, 18, good. 6 and 12, 8 and, so not 7, 8 and 9. Okay, and then we have to find which two are going to add to 1. Remember, they're opposites. Okay, so it's really the 2 that subtract the 1. Yep, so you have 8 and 9. Which one has to be positive? The 9. Because if you have 8 minus 9, that would be negative 1. Okay, so this would be your final answer. Okay, if some of you tried that without me and you left the negative in, that is not necessarily wrong, and I would not mark that wrong with the negative, but if you have a GCF that is not -1, you do have to take it out, and we do want to start doing that where we're taking out the GCF. So did any of you write down like one of these answers? You don't have to. Okay. So if you wrote down one of these answers, do you notice how here you have the negative and the negative? That would be a good place to take out the negative. Okay, and if you took out this negative here, you would go back to the one that I had. Okay, but if you got one of those answers, like I said, those are equivalent, and I would not mark that wrong. Okay. All right, I want you to try F. If you haven't already. All right, so this one, you're trying to find two numbers that add, or that multiply to the last number, add to the middle. So what's going to multiply to 25 but add to 10? 5 and 5. So x plus 5 and x plus 5. This is another special pattern. Like I said, one of the patterns that you could find it just by foiling. You can rewrite this as x plus 5 squared. Okay, so when you have the same value twice, you can write it as x plus 5 squared. I do want you to practice doing that, as it will be helpful when we go further into this chapter. And then this is the perfect square trinomial. So that's this special pattern, the perfect square trinomial. Okay, and again, you can find that by using the guess and check method, but just recognize that 25 is a perfect square, x squared is a perfect square, and then this is double of that square root. That's why it's a special pattern. Okay, now we are going to deal with some numbers that are not prime, and so these tend to be a little bit trickier. Okay, and then once you write that down, I want you to focus on the first number, and there are going to be several different possibilities for how you can write this. Okay, so there's going to be 3 different ways that we can start this. Okay, because now we're trying to multiply to 12. If we're trying to multiply to 12, we can get there using different factors. Okay, so to multiply to 12, you could use what?
4.
Yep, 4x and 3x is 1. What's another one? 1 and 12, great. Or, yep, okay, so we're going to write out our possible solutions. So the more you practice, the more you'll kind of develop a number sense of, oh, hey, I should start with something that's bigger, or two factors that are smaller. I like that some of you are already doing some guessing and checking here. Okay, so we don't know which way we have to start. So we're going to have to check a few of these out. So to help us, let's make our t-chart for negative 45. So 1 and 45, 2 doesn't go in there. Does 3 go in there? Yeah, because 4 plus 5 is 9, and if 3 goes into 9, it goes into 45. Yeah, so 3 and 15. Yeah, and then 6 doesn't go in there, 7, 8, and then I go back to 9. Okay, so let's do some guessing and checking. So notice that you have 44. Okay, 44 is not a small number. So if the numbers are smaller, you tend to want to pick numbers that are close together. So because that's a little bit bigger, I might start with the 6x and the 2x. And I might try to guess and check with that. You do not have to start with that. You can do whatever your little heart wants to guess and check. Okay, and then 9 times 5 is my favorite factor of 45. So maybe I just plug in a plus and a minus, and then I would check it. Okay, so 9 times 2 is going to be 18x. 6 and 5 is negative 30. Well, that's negative 12, so that's not going to work. Okay, so make sure that just because I tried the 9 with the 6 and the 5 with the 2, that doesn't mean that I can't flip them, because you're going to be multiplying by different numbers. Okay, so let's do the same thing. You can make this a minus, this one a plus. So if you do negative 5 times 2, you get negative 10x. 6 times 9, 54. So, yeah, so 44, does that match the middle? Yep. Right, so sometimes you might have to check multiple values to find what works. That's okay. Okay, and then I always just check it, 6 times 2 to get the 12, negative 10, 54, we did that here, and then negative times a positive is a negative. So I would just do that quick check in your mind. Okay, you don't have to write out your check, but again, if you feel like this factoring is pretty new to you, I would recommend doing that. Okay, so we do have a trinomial. So generally, we've been starting with 2 parentheses, but don't forget, you want to check for that GCF. If they all have an x in it, then you have to take those out. In fact, how many x's can you take out of each one? Yep, so we're going to take out x squared. And then what about numerically? Is there a number I can take out of all? 2, because they're all what type of numbers? Even. So if I take out the 2, I have 9x squared minus 37x plus 4. And then look, 9, 37, and 4. Do those have anything in common? Nope, so you know you took the biggest one out. Right? So that's helpful because now I just have to factor down this trinomial. The 2x squared is going to stay on the outside. Now again, you have a number that's not prime. So to multiply to 9, you can either have 9x and x, or don't forget the 2x squared on the outside, or you can have 3x and 3x. So these are your 2 options. You can have 9 times x, or you can have 3 times 3. And then they have to multiply to that last number 4. I like that because what are the only things that multiply to 4? 2 and 2 and 1 and 4. So I only have 2 options. Okay, I'm going to give you some time to plug it in and try to guess and check that out. Okay, and then how are we doing with this? So again, you're trying to get close to 37. You have 1 and 4, 2 and 2. If you plug in 2 times 9 is 18, 18 and 2 is 20. That's not big enough. So you want to multiply 9 by something that's going to get that number up there. So if you put the 4 here, 4 times 9 is what? 36. So if you want this to be, if this is a positive and this is a negative, what do I know about my signs? They have to be the same. So they both have to be negative. So this would be negative 1x. This would be negative 36x. That would add up to negative 37. So yay, that is going to be your final answer. When you're writing your final answer, do not forget your GCF. Okay, that does sit out there in front. Okay. All right. So on the back side are some extra examples for you. There's one more type that I want us to try. Okay. Really, this is just extra examples for you if you get stuck. And it's just reminding you, you always take out the common factor, find a pattern if there is one, and if not, you're going to factor back into 2 binomials. And there's this other term here. And this is your guess and your check. Okay, so we already went over together the difference of 2 squares on the front. So we're just going to highlight this. This is just another example of the 3x minus 8, 3x plus 8, your perfect squares. And then you have your perfect square trinomial here. Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to do another one on taking out the common factor because you haven't seen one like this yet. So I want you to try this. 16x cubed y minus 28x squared y squared. Okay, so see if you can take out the GCF there. All right, so with your numbers, you have 16 and 28. What's the biggest number that goes into both? 4. And then you have x cubed and x squared, so you can take out x what? Squared, and then how many y's? 1y. And then put your parentheses. So when you do that, you're taking, like, you see how I just went variable by variable, number by number? And then you divide. So 16 divided by 4 is 4. X cubed divided by x squared is x squared divided by x, or x cubed divided by x squared is x. And then y divided by itself, that cancels. And then here you'll do negative 28 divided by 4, and that will be negative 7. The x squared divided by itself will cancel, and y squared divided by y is y. Okay, so then this is going to be your final. So sometimes you might have more than one variable in there. Okay, do you guys feel like you know your perfect squares pretty well? Okay, so a perfect square, don't forget the first one. The first perfect square is 1. So that's going to be something you'll have to recognize. Okay, I think you should definitely know your perfect squares up through 10 squared by heart. Okay, if you want like a little reference, you can write them down on the side. Those are numbers that you want to look for when you have the difference of two squares. Okay, and then another way that you can do the factoring is by breaking up the middle term and grouping. That's not something you have to use, and I don't really like to show it until I've gone over factoring by grouping, but I'm going to show this to you. Have any of you done something like this where you try to add the middle terms together? You have? You have done that? Okay. They did this part wrong, and so
The signs are the opposite.
yeah, exactly. So I don't like that. Okay, I call it the house method. And so like if you are getting sick of guessing and checking, this is something that can help with that. So if you have 4x squared plus 25x minus 2, or 21, sorry. Okay, so if you have that, then what you're going to do is multiply the first number and the last number together. So you have to multiply the first and last numbers. So 4 times negative 21 is negative 84. Okay, what you're going to do is you're going to list the factors of negative 84. You want to look for the two factors that make this middle number 25. Okay, and then we drop the sides down. So this is 4x squared. This is negative 21. And then we're looking for a way to rewrite 25x as two terms that multiply to 84. Okay, so we're just going to go in order until we find it. Because it's a negative, remember these signs have to be opposites. Okay, so you have 1 and 84. Do those subtract to make 25? No. 2 and 42. So those subtract to make 40, so no. 3 and no. 28. So do those subtract to make 25?
Yeah.
28 minus 3, yep. So what you're going to do is you're going to rewrite this as 28x minus 3x. And I put them in this order for a special reason, and that's because with the 3 and 21, 3 is going to go into both. So I'm going to group those two together, and I'm going to group these two together. So eventually we're going to learn how to factor by grouping. This will be just a brief intro. So 4x squared and 28x, I can take 4x out of both of those. So if I take 4x out of 4x squared, I get x. 28 divided by 4x is 7. And then you're going to do the same thing with this. Now, negative 3 and negative 21, what's a number that goes into both? 3 and 21.
3, 1.
3. Now, you want to take out negative 3, and here's why. If you take out negative 3, look what you're going to be left with inside. You're going to have x plus 7. So if these two match, that means you did it right. Okay, so this is one of your factors, the x plus 7. The other factor is in front. See this 4x and minus 3? Now some of you are probably thinking, wow, I think I'd rather just guess and check. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, in some cases I think the guess and check is faster. Okay, but then these are you can guess and check here. You have negative 3x, you have negative positive 28x, that's going to be 25. 4x times x is 4x squared, negative 3 times 7 is negative 21. Okay, and with this example here, they just typed this out wrong. So this should be negative 3x here. This should be negative, so that this is negative and this is positive. No, it should. It should. Yeah, yeah, you're right. This should be the plus 7 and the plus 7. Thank you. Thank you. All right. So today you are going to have a worksheet. So your worksheet is mandatory. So we're going to have a mandatory worksheet today, and then your mandatory packet tomorrow. And I'm going to give you time to work on your worksheet. And then we're going to talk about tomorrow. So you just